We've covered a lot of rivalries on this series, from Rosberg vs. Hamilton, from Silver vs. Loeb, to Toyota vs. Le Mans itself. But today, I want to talk about a rivalry that, in my opinion, is kind of overrated for how lopsided it actually is, but nonetheless is incredibly popular, so much so that a movie is being released about it next month. So bear with me as I talk about the Lancia 037 one last time, pinky promise, and cover the Audi vs. Lancia rivalry of the Group B rally era to try and get the full picture and answer the question, how much of an underdog was Lancia really? As mentioned in the intro, we've talked a lot about these characters. The Audi Quattro, Lancia 37, and Group B all have their own specific videos, not to mention cameos in various other episodes, so I will try to not go too deep into each individual one, and instead focus on the basics right now, so we can actually get to the rivalry itself. Once Lancia changed rallying history with the purpose-built Stratos, the FIA wanted to redesign the WRC rules so that everyone could build a Stratos and therefore boost popularity. So they cut the production requirements down from 400 to 200, and then they threw away every rule in the rulebook except for some basic weight and tire specs being regulated by engine displacement. And as it happens, Lancia was dominating Group 5 sports car racing with their Monte Carlo Turbo, and their parent company Fiat thought that the new rules would be a good way to relaunch the brand into rallying once again. And while this was going on, Audi was testing their new four-wheel drive Quattro in the 1981 WRC season, scoring 4 podiums, including 3 wins. The Quattro proved that four-wheel drive was incredibly fast on loose surfaces, and the 360 horsepower inline 5 made it brutally fast accelerating. But it had a weakness. It was based on their Audi 80 Coupe platform, which meant the engine was almost completely ahead of the front axle, which made the Quattro heavy and unbalanced, significantly hurting the handling. Which is why it's a perfect opposite to the Lancia. Lancia was given the latest project from Abarth, Pininfarina, and Dallara, the R037, so not only did it have some of the best Italian designers and chassis engineers working on it, Lancia and Abarth had 10 rallying titles between them, and the 037 was the culmination of all of their work. Similarly to the Lancia Group 5 program, it was a silhouette version of the Monte Carlo. It had tube frame with Kevlar and fiberglass bodywork to weigh just 2,100 pounds, over 500 less than the Quattro. It also had the Fiat 131 Abarth's 2-liter 4-cylinder supercharged engine, making 265 horsepower mounted in the middle for 50-50 weight distribution. So yeah, it had 100 horsepower less than the Audi, but the handling was in another realm. And the supercharger also eliminated lag compared to the Quattro's turbocharged 5-cylinder, improving the drivability, which is essential for a handling-focused rear-wheel drive car. And both of these cars were ready for the inaugural Group B season in 1982. Almost. Lancia was still testing their rear-wheel drive masterpiece, and therefore they didn't really matter in 1982. They only entered 6th round, scoring points in just 2 of them, earning themselves 9th in the championship, behind Porsche and Mitsubishi, while just barely beating a privateer Talbot. But I still want to talk about 1982 in full because I believe it reinforces my point that at the time, four-wheel drive was not the silver bullet people think it was. The 1982 season was a 2-horse race between the Opel of Walter Röhrl and the Audi of Michel Mouton. Röhrl took control of the championship early on with a win in the Monte Carlo, but when he retired in Kenya, Mouton won and began mounting a legitimate title fight. Unfortunately, she may have won 2 more rallies that year, but she also had 4 retirements, which allowed Röhrl to cruise to a second championship by 12 points, and her second place is still the highest placed female driver in WRC history. but it was not so cut and dry for the Constructors' title. Roll's consistency in his Ascana 400 meant that even with Audi winning 4 events to Opel's 1, the standings heading into the final round was Opel leading Audi by 7 points. And when Audi crossed the line in Wales with a 1-2 finish, they ended the season with 122 points on the clock. But then, Henry Toivonen's Ascana crossed the line in P3, ending Opel's season with 125 points. But the crazy part is that Audi still won the title. And I know what you're thinking, 125 minus 122 means that Opel has a 3-point advantage. However, the worst results are excluded from the season at this point in time. They didn't change those rules until many years later, which meant that Opel lost 21 points, while Audi lost just 9, and therefore they took the title. And what's even more infuriating is that Opel won the Ivory Coast Rally and finished 3rd in Sweden, but since those did not count for the Constructors' title, they missed out on 32 more points, when Audi only scored 18 in the same event. 1982 should have been the year that a 4-wheel drive car was defeated in full-time WRC, but the weird rules prevented that from happening. So let's move on to 1983. Lancia beefed up their team to mount a real title effort. Their 037 now had 280 horsepower and improved reliability compared to the previous year. They also snagged Roll from Opel with a strange clause in his contract. You see, Roll didn't care about another title, so he signed on to the team on the condition that he only drove the rallies he wanted to drive. Which is weird, but I guess if he's one of the best drivers of all time, I guess he can do what he wants. That meant he only competed in 6 out of the 12 rounds that year, and Lancia weren't much better, since they only planned to compete in 10 out of the 12 rounds, skipping Sweden and the Ivory Coast due to a lack of Constructors' title points and budget restrictions on Lancia's end. Audi, meanwhile, had the budget to field a 3-car team for every single event. Lancia, as I mentioned, couldn't do that, so instead they used tactics to counter the Audi's budget. They ran 3 cars in the specific rallies that suited the 037 the most: Monte Carlo, Portugal, and the Tour de Corsa. And in the Monte Carlo season opener, they had some luck. It was strangely warm in the front Riviera in January, and warm weather means no snow covering those nice tarmac switchbacks, and when there was snow, Lancia made sure to get rid of it by salting the roads beforehand. But there were some stages that were covered in so much ice that even warm weather and sneaky salting couldn't clear it. But Cesar Fiorio, Lancia's team boss, had a trick up his sleeve from the old days of the Stratos. Change the tires. The 037 started the stage on studded tires and midway through changed for slicks, meaning they got the best of both environments. Now, none of this was in the spirit of the rules, but it wasn't illegal either, and the result was that Lancia started 1983 off with a 1-2 finish with Audi in 3rd. And then Audi driver Hannu Mikkola won the Swedish rally with Lancia's no-show and took the driver's title lead. He then took the Constructors' title lead as well, with a 2nd consecutive win in Portugal, while the brutal Safari rally pulled no punches and the mid-engined Italians all retired, expanding Mikkola's lead over Roll to 33 points, and Audi's lead over Lancia to 16 points. But then, it all just sorta came together. Lancia scored a 1-2-3 in the Tour de Corsa, their first of 3 consecutive wins from that point on. Audi, meanwhile, in the same period, scored just 14 points, including 2 rounds where they failed to score a single point, thanks to 5 mechanical failures and 2 crashes, meaning that Roll turned that 33-point deficit into a 22-point advantage, while Lancia led Audi by a massive 26 points. Reminder, a win was just 18 points back then, and only 1 car could count for each team. Sure, Audi did mount a comeback, winning Argentina and Finland, which allowed Mikola to overtake Roll when he elected not to compete in Rally Finland. But still, Lancia had such a point spot for that they could take the title with a round to spare in San Remo. So they called all hands on deck and entered 3 cars into their home rally. Audi, desperate to salvage their title, entered 4 cars into the competition in San Remo, and all 4 of them had to watch in dismay as Lancia shined and Marco Allen led the Italians to another 1-2-3, which secured them the World Championship. In fact, it proved to be a bit of overkill, the 1-2-3, given that Audi had a shocking rally with a best finish of 7th, scoring just 6 points. San Remo brought Roll and Allen to within 5 points of Mikola, but it didn't matter. Lancia blew their budget and Roll didn't care anyway, so Mikola stormed away with the driver's title, winning by 23 points over Roll. With 1983 enshrined in glory, Lancia got more money and an Evo 2 variant with 300 horsepower on tap for 1984. Sure, they lost Roll to Audi, but Allen wasn't exactly slow either. The bigger problem was what Roll was driving, the A2 Quattro. The A2 was an evolution of the Quattro with less weight, brake cooling ducts, and 370 horsepower, 70 more than Lancia. And I know what you're thinking. Why would you use the 037 in that case? Well, think of it this way. They won 1983 pretty comfortably. They got just as many wins as Audi, and if it was not for the fact that Roll didn't care, he probably could have won the Drivers' Championship as well. Unfortunately for Lancia, the A2 was significantly better than they expected, and it just demolished the competition, scoring 2 podium lockouts in Monte Carlo and Sweden back-to-back. Lancia didn't get on the podium until Portugal, which meant that they were 12 points behind Audi, and Allen was 16 points behind Mikola after just the 3rd rally. But then, the Audi of Stig Blomqvist retired in Kenya, and Mikola retired in the Tour de Corse. These failures allowed Lancia and Allen to catch up, and when they scored a 1-2 finish, their first win of the season in the Tour de Corse, Lancia closed into just 4 points behind Audi, while Marco took the lead of the driver's flight by a single point over Mikola. Audi didn't appreciate that very much, and Blomqvist proceeded to win the next 3 rallies in a row while Allen and Mikola fought for second, ensuring that Blomqvist would finally win his long overdue championship because, well, the two of them just kept taking points off of each other. And similarly to Blomqvist, it seemed like Audi was walking away to a pretty easy championship win. They had just taken 3 straight rally victories, and Lancia didn't even show up to Argentina, meaning that the gap between the two teams expanded to 28 points with just 3 rounds to go. Surely, there was no way for Lancia to come back from the brink. And yet, Audi failed to score a single point in Finland and San Remo due to mechanical failures and accidents. Sure, Peugeot won both rallies with their formidable 205 T16, but Lancia got 2nd and 3rd both times, meaning that somehow, in just 2 rounds, Lancia went from 28 points behind to 4 points ahead of Audi as the last round of the season arrived in the RAC. But it seemed that Lancia were so excited to catch up to Audi that they forgot to show up to the UK. And Audi secured the championship with ease by finishing 2nd behind another Peugeot win. For one reason or another, the only time Lancia showed up to the RAC rally with the 037 was 1982, when they weren't fighting for a title. It's a rather anticlimactic end, given that they had a real shot of pulling off a legitimate underdog victory over Audi, compared to the relatively large buffer they had in 1983, but nobody showed up, and therefore they got silver. Which is a shame, given that with Peugeot's evolution of the 205 arriving in 1985, four-wheel drive finally became the only option in rallying, and Lancia begrudgingly accepted that they were on the wrong side of history. Therefore, they only contested a handful of rallies in 1985, scoring 2 podiums somehow with a rear-wheel drive 037, and finishing a very distant 3rd in the championship. And with the launch of the brutal 4-wheel drive Delta S4 at the end of 1985, the 037 was retired, barring a guest appearance in the 1986 Safari Rally, where it got a surprise podium 4 years after it debuted. Now the stats support the theory that Lancia was an underdog, given that Audi won more constructors' titles, more drivers' titles, and more rallies. But those stats hide the fact that Lancia threw away a real chance to win 1984, and that they didn't really try in 1982 or 1985. I agree that Lancia was not as quick as Audi 9 times out of 10, but they were more consistent, having just 6 retirements between 1983 and 1984 split across all 11 of their drivers. It's why Lancia only won a single rally till Audi's 5 in 1984, but they still led the standings heading into the final round. So from a team perspective, no, they were not the underdogs compared to Audi, especially in 1983. Operationally speaking, they were on a different level. Don't get me wrong, 1983 is still a fantastic story, but we wouldn't be telling it like we are right now had they won 1984 as well. It's amazing how one little change will warp our entire perception of history. Now, the 037 is the last rear-wheel drive car to win the World I Championship, and it is regarded as one of the greatest competitors of all time, despite only winning 6 rallies. It also happens to be the most beautiful rally car ever made, in my opinion, and that's why I will be there in theaters to watch that admittedly mediocre-looking movie, even though the story that they're telling isn't as dramatic as they're selling it.